just follow this format. In the Q&A, you can write questions at any time you want. So questions for one speaker or for other speakers or for myself. I asked if there is a button with a little flag. There used to be a flag there. So sometimes if you see a flag and you're happy with that particular question, then you can flag, so then more people show that you are interested in that particular question as well. And so I said we'll collect the questions at the end. Okay, a few words. I said a few words from me regarding this this report. So the report that you have on the Foreign Policy website is the result of nearly over two years of work, and it's the outcome of two projects. The project being supported by the British Academy. And when we were very fortunate to travel, was able to collect qualitative data in 6 countries. So in Serbia and Ukraine in 2018, and then Armenia, Bulgaria, Georgia, and Moldova in 2019, so last year. And we also organized 3 workshops in Belgrade, Kiev, and Yerevan. So the report you see brings together scholars with expertise on so many national languages in that particular region. And we thought about putting together reports on each country in the region. And they, as you probably noticed, each report follows the same format. They have follows exactly the same kind of questions, the kind of the findings, recommendations, particularly to those particular countries. And the reports also, each chapter represents the voice and thoughts of each author rather than all of us working on a particular topic. So I shall be very brief. You will have the executive summary with my thoughts on the work of the others. And I very much encourage everyone to also read the findings on each particular chapter. They say those colleagues have expertise on those countries, so that you'll find that very useful. So regarding the whole project as a whole, so I would just want to emphasize 2 points. First, religious communities in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet states have done and continue to do a lot of work with populations in need, and we have to take this into account. However, at the same time, each country is different, and I think we should be analyzed on a case by case. You will see that some communities, as in the report is emphasized, that some communities are more active than others. In some countries, the discourses coming from religious channels is politicized. Some activities are public, some are not. So just bearing this balance in mind, I think that's important to understand. And secondly, I think it's important to emphasize is that there is very little contact between religious communities conducting work with populations in need. So just to give you an example, if you're a refugee crossing one country from one country to another, or 2 or 3 countries, you are faced with completely different perspectives on help that emerges on your way, despite interfaith, interreligious dialogue between these countries. So that's this. I think these 2 main findings I would like to emphasize, and the work done by others or the policymakers that they have in mind, they should take those 2 elements into account. So I shall now give the floor to the speakers. So I said I'm delighted to have 4 speakers with us who will present the work on national case studies. I'm also delighted to have the author of the chapter on Moldova, Andrei Avram. And though he's not speaking due to the limited time we have, I said encourage very much that everyone there to write comments on countries that you will hear in a few minutes, and also think about Moldova. And Andrei is very happy to answer questions regarding his chapter when the time comes. So the first speaker is Jasmine Jean Tragut is head of the Center for the Study of the Christian East and the Department for Armenian Studies, and senior scientist at the Department of Biblical Studies and Ecclesiastical History at the University of Salzburg in Austria. So Jasmine, the floor is yours.
Hello and good afternoon from sunny Austria. I hope you can hear me. So my task is to tell you and to give you a lot of information about the Republic of Armenia and its response to refugee waves. First of all, it's very difficult to speak about Armenia and immigration because Armenia is in general a typical emigration country. So Armenia is one of the countries in the world with the highest rate of emigration. And this trend is continuing from the start of the new Republic of Armenia, 1991, until today, so about 30 years now, the trend of emigrating from the Republic of Armenia is continuing. But on the other hand, there is an influx of population. And who are these people coming into Armenia? Talking about displaced people, especially forcibly displaced people. So first of all, we have two migrant waves or refugee waves in the history of the Armenian Republic. First of all, at the very beginning of the Republic of Armenia, after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, Armenia was fighting for the independence, not only from Soviet Union, but also for the independence of the small territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, of Mountainous Karabakh. And because of this armed conflict with its neighboring republic, Azerbaijan, Armenia welcomed a lot of refugees from the neighboring region of Azerbaijan and of course also of Mountainous Karabakh. The number of these refugees might be around 300,000. There are no official numbers. Anyhow, this was the first wave going back to the 90s. The second wave started in the beginning of the new millennium at about 2000, but the peak was in the last years, starting from 2012, with the war in Syria and an influx of refugees from Syria, but also from other countries from the Middle East, also with the Islamic State's pogroms of Christians. So refugees came in, especially from Syria. And we have a small proportion of asylum seekers and refugees coming in from the Middle East, especially from Iran, from Iraq, from Lebanon also, and some people from the Far East and from India. So what about the proportion of these people? What about the quantity of these people? Who are these people? So what makes Armenia quite different from the other countries we will talk about today is that the majority of the people, of the displaced people entering Armenia are ethnic Armenians. So Armenians are going to Armenia, to their ancestral homeland, their symbolic homeland, and of course they are not really considered as refugees. And that's the main point in the policy of Armenia, and in the state policy of Armenia, and also in the church response to this refugee wave. Because these people arriving from Syria, and there are about 22,000 right now, having arrived in Armenia from Syria, they are considered repatriates. They're considered people who come back to their home country and not asylum seekers and refugees. And as a matter of fact, most of them are not refugees or do not ask for asylum. This is a very small proportion of ethnic Armenians entering Armenia that really ask for asylum, about 200 people, 300 people, including people from Iran and Iraq. So what happens to these refugees? First of all, there is the state policy since at least 3-4 years to naturalize these Armenian refugees from Syria, Iran, and Iraq as quickly as possible. So Armenia implemented a law and amended this law that ethnic Armenian refugees can be naturalized as quickly as possible. They have a very fast procedure, which means that about 18,000 Syrian Armenians that have entered Armenia until 2018, 15,000 have been naturalized, so they have become citizens of Armenia. So what is difficult about it is, first of all, these are now Armenian citizens. So they are not considered refugees. They don't have a refugee status, but in facto, they are refugees and they live in refugee-like conditions. That's a problem. But the state does not have to care for them because they are not refugees anymore. The second is that those people who are accepted as refugees, like also some other Christian population having arrived from Syria or Iraq, like Assyrians, or even some Yazidis have arrived from Iraq. They received regular asylum and received the regular humanitarian help for refugees. So that's the state policy. What about the church? For the church, it's different because these people are Armenian. So they are considered all Armenian, they're ethnic Armenians, they're considered as followers of their own church. The Armenian church, which belongs to the group of the Orthodox churches, is also the oldest church in the world, or is considered the oldest state church of the world. And as a matter of fact, the Armenian church had a very strong position in the Armenian history as national leader. It was only after the break of the Soviet Union that the national Armenian church had to think again about its position in Armenia. And there was a very big fight between state and church for this leader position for the Armenian people in the new Republic of Armenia. As you know, more than 9-10 million Armenians live outside of the Republic of Armenia. So we have a huge Armenian diaspora community. Most of them are followers of the Armenian Apostolic Church. So when these people come as refugees to their Republic of Armenia, they are considered the same. So because they have the same culture, they have the same language, they have the same belief, which is in fact not true. They are very different from each other, diasporan Armenians and the Republic Armenians, and this you can also see in the religion, in the religious traditions, how they follow the church. So the church has also problems in care for these refugees. In general, the church state relations in Armenia are regulated by concordate law. So the power is divided and the church is not allowed to interfere into state organization or state laws. But the church, of course, has a very strong position in the diaspora, not as much as in the Republic of Armenia. Anyhow, what does the church do for refugees? There is no organized humanitarian help. So the church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, the official church, has no official policy what to do with refugees. Refugees talking about ethnic Armenians and refugees non-ethnic Armenians. So to start with the non-ethnic Armenians. This is very difficult. This is the most difficult issue for Armenians to accept people in Armenia that are not ethnic Armenians and are not Christians. This is a matter of fact. So if the church tries to help refugees, the help goes to their own people. So first, help Armenians. Second, help Christians. Third, help others. That's the main policy of the church. What is problematic in Armenia is that people and also the state cannot see any humanitarian help of the church to the refugees. And so they say the church does nothing. The church doesn't act, the church has no program for refugees, which is simply not true. One problem is that there is a lot of private work going on in humanitarian help. There are small parishes, there are priests, but there's no official, let's say, like a diocese or like the primate of the Armenian church who says, okay, we have this humanitarian program. There are several NGOs and organizations who cooperate, and they even cooperate on interchurch level, which means the Armenian Apostolic Church, which has a very strong position in Armenia because it is considered a more or less religious homogeneous country. So the Armenian Church says Armenia is 97% Armenian Apostolic, which is also not true. But anyhow, they try to do things, but unfortunately, they do not have good public relations. So many things they have done in the history of the Republic of Armenia, and what they are doing now is simply not visible to other organizations, to the state, because they do it in the parishes. There are some priests who help refugee families, who take refugee families. Of course, the church cares for the spiritual and pastoral care of the refugees. So they have some special program like pilgrimages for the Armenian traditions and so on, but not about humanitarian help. So it's very difficult for the Armenian church to support these refugees, ethnic or non-ethnic Armenians, with financial help. If there is financial help provided by the church, it's from the diaspora. So if we have some bigger humanitarian sums, like a few $1,000s or whatever, they come from the diasporan dioceses, like, for example, European dioceses, America, Canada, and so on, that collect money to help the Armenian church, to help the ethnic Armenian refugees in Armenia. So this is a main problem in the Armenian refugee response, to see that there is no real cooperation between church, state, and NGOs on refugee response. That's the first problem. The second problem is that in the Armenian tradition of the church, and also in the Armenian mentality, it's very difficult to give help to foreign people, which means non-ethnic Armenians. They even had some problems in the 90s and the early 20s with the refugees from Montagnous Karabakh, because of their language, because of their different culture. So that's one of the main problems, lacking cooperation of the responsible organizations in state and church, that the church humanitarian organizations have not good public relations, so it's absolutely not visible what they do, especially if you try to find something on the web. You won't find it only if you can speak Italian or Russian, Armenian or Russian. You can find some information, because you will hardly find something in English. And as I said, there is a kind of tension between the religious groups in Armenia, because the Armenian Apostolic Church doesn't want to cooperate officially with other churches in humanitarian help, except the other Armenian sister churches, like the Armenian Catholic Church, the Armenian Evangelical churches, but not as much as with, like, let's say, charismatic groups, evangelical groups that provide a lot of humanitarian help to all the groups. So that's also a problem, this lacking cooperation with other religious humanitarian organizations. Well, I think that was a lot of information in a short time. I could provide you a lot of numbers which might be interesting. Maybe also because we're talking then about the Ukraine, it's very interesting that the highest percentage of non-ethnic Armenians come from the Ukraine. So we have some Ukrainian asylum seekers and refugees in Armenia, which is rather interesting. Why, I don't know how and why they came to Armenia. It's very interesting.
Okay, thank you very much, Jasmine. That's very, very useful. A reminder to everyone else who is joining us that you have the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So don't hesitate, just write your thoughts or any questions for the speakers. We shall continue to stay in the region, so moving on from Armenia to Georgia, and I'm delighted to have here Dr. Tornike Matrivelli, who is an international postdoctoral fellow and a lecturer at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. Tornike, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot to the attendees that I'm seeing here online. So basically, I'll try not to be lost in a lot of descriptive statistics, but somehow I have to navigate through. So give you the political context. The armed conflicts in the breakaway Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley region, or South Ossetia, resulted in displacement of hundreds of thousands of people, 273,000 by different estimates. Those were overwhelmingly ethnic Georgians. And Georgia's religious field has evolved in the context, and we need to contextualize this somehow with the IDP crisis, has evolved in the context of fusion between religious and ethnic identities. So the issues of integration of the IDPs, the internally displaced people, into the larger national project has ever been the case. So ever since the great collapse of the Soviet Union, this was the big issue. So in the course of the church's interactions with the political power structures, the Georgian Orthodox Church somehow managed to normatively intertwine the concept of nationhood, which is being Georgian, and with the religious identity of being Orthodox Christian. So somehow these two categories of practice have been fused and merged throughout the history. So hence, what might seem like a contradiction in terms of the universalism of the Christian theology became gradually entrenched through the church's collaboration with the state. So, and the two largest minority religious organizations. So one is the Islamic community and the Armenian Apostolic Church. Both of them struggled to compete for the fundamental rights and liberties which were granted to which were taken for granted to the Georgian Orthodox Church, such as registration, property rights, funding practices. And with major religious organizations busy with advancing their organizational interests or challenging the existing power relations, the IDPs, the internally displaced people, were marginalized in an ongoing process of Georgia's major economic, social, and political transition. So, given the Georgia's situation in the early 90s, and for those who don't follow Georgian politics that much, was a crumbling state institutions, a lot of dysfunctional state apparatus, and the integration or even accommodation of the IDPs was not a priority area of the policymakers and the policy making for the Georgian government. So this manifested itself in the non-existence of a state integration strategy to address the issues posed by the significant internal population displacement. So only in 2007, and this is 3 years after the Rose Revolution, 4 years, only in 2007 was the first state strategy towards the IDPs adopted. It outlined the mechanisms and objectives of the Georgian state with regard to the integration of the IDPs in the Georgian socio-political life, as well as the approach to facilitate dignified living conditions for the internally displaced people. After escaping the two wars of the early 90s, most IDPs ended up living in the so-called IDP settlements, which were often regular schools or old Soviet infrastructure, kindergartens, Soviet hotels, and that have been repurposed to accommodate them. So Due to the endemic corruption at the state level, as I mentioned before, the aid programs designed for the Georgian IDPs often failed to reach them. And the involuntary character of their migration resulted in an impoverished and sociopolitically disengaged population of the IDPs in the new settlements. So in 2008, Georgia had another war, Russian invasion, Russian war with over the territory of South Ossetia or Tskhinvali region. The new IDP population of Georgia received a very different treatment, both from international community and the government, and particularly from external donors such as the USAID and the European Union. So the scale of these two wars and of course, and the waves of internal displacement diverged. For example, the Abkhazian War of early 90s led to displacement by various estimates of 200,000 to 230,000 people. The more recent armed conflict in Tskhinvali region forced around 27,000 Georgian citizens to flee their homes in the conflict zone. So lastly, the internal displacement and armed conflicts affected all major religious organizations. And as Jasmine mentioned, there have been a tough choice for the churches who to help for the lack of resources, and also in terms of the limited access to the canonical territories that were left beyond the controlled territory of the Georgian state. So, and to give you a quick sense of the funding, in terms of funding, if one compares how the church, how the major Georgian religions, and I'm focusing about these three, were disproportionately funded, it draws an interesting comparison. For example, if one compares the total combined funding that was allocated to the Georgian church during the presidency of Mikhail Saakashvili with the funding available to other religious denominations, one sees a significant differences. For example, Transparency International's research showed that between 2004 to 2013, the Georgian Orthodox Church received approximately £48 million. And while, for example, the Armenian Church received financial assistance amounting to only £11,566 from 2009 to 2012. Of course, there's a shorter time frame, but clearly disproportional, although there was the second biggest Christian organization to Georgia and third largest religious minority group. So this proportional trend continued under the Georgian Dream government, and in partial and symbolic compensation for the damage to religious communities during the Soviet regime, the Islamic community of Georgia received approximately £357,000 in 2004, whereas in 2015 the amount was at £714,000. This is again the publicly available information. So now back to the elephant in the room. So how do religious or actors engage with human security, and what are the mechanisms of Orthodox churches to support forcibly displaced populations? To the best of my knowledge, no publicly available data shows how the Georgian Orthodox Church engages with the IDPs from an institutional perspective. And I may be clear again, building what Jasmine have mentioned, that there have been individual cases of humanitarian assistance from different priests, but I'm talking from as a policy and from the institutionalist perspective. For example, the Georgian Orthodox Church, we now know that runs 90 educational and social institutions, such as seminaries, schools, and kindergartens, with 2,000 employees and approximately 18,000 children attending them. Also, the Georgian Orthodox Church operates between 7 to 9 orphanages, which house approximately 1,200 to 1,500 children. The Patriarchate of the Georgian Orthodox Church, which is the administrative body, has 16 charity and development foundations, 10 of which focus on charity, education, construction, and restoration of churches. And this data becomes untraceable due to the constitutional agreement, the legal status of the church, which doesn't allow the state to track a number of financial operations by the church. So to compare that with the other two largest minority groups, the Armenian Apostolic Church receives considerably less funding, as I said before, than Georgian Orthodox Church, and hence relatively little is known about its activities. But from the content analysis of the statements of the clerics and the websites of the diocesan department and cultural centers run by the Armenian Apostolic Church in Georgia, the primary mission and objective of the AAC's Department of Youth is to unite the Armenian youth of Georgia around the church to promote Armenian education and inculcate a sense of commitment to the lofty ideas of preservation of national identity. This is a quote from the kind of programmatic statement. So in addition to helping the academic progress of Armenian population, the objectives of the department also list civic education of the youth and its primary objective. So along the lines of civic education, and of course, the church sees itself as a promoter of human rights and education in order to help, quote, the Armenian population to integrate into the Georgian civil society. But a very interesting dynamics is, of course, that how in practice the Armenian Orthodox Church and Georgian Orthodox Church interact when it comes to the ongoing issues between the two largest churches. So, and to just go back to the programmatic statement, the Armenian Apostolic Church receives prioritizes the duty of the youth organizations is to take care of the Tbilisi pantheon of the Armenian writers and organize trips to Karabakh and basically engage in cultural activities to keep the close bond between Armenia and the Georgian Armenian population. But one explanation perhaps why the AAC is not engaged in social and humanitarian projects concerns perhaps its tense relationships with the Georgian Orthodox Church because of the continued disagreement about the church property ownership. The two churches have at least 5 ongoing disputes at the time of writing about Armenian churches in Tbilisi and one in Akhaltsikhe. According to the Georgian Orthodox Church, the Armenian side requests the return of Armenian churches, while the Georgian Orthodox Church cannot exercise its duties, and also 5 churches under the canonical jurisdiction of the Georgian Church, because, as the argument goes, the AAC considers these churches to belong to itself. So there is a lot of tension between the churches, which is in a way what the church, at least the church elites, are busy with. So now to the Muslim community, and I'm going closer to conclusion to just save time to other panelists. The Georgian Muslim community in Ajara, which is the western seaside part, continues to face othering discourses, which manifest themselves in public pressure on practicing their religion. So, which in practice means that because of the fusion of Orthodox Christian identity with the idea of being Georgian. Again, this is a discourse advocated by the Orthodox Church. Many are forced to practice and so forced to practice their Georgianness while having the Muslim identity in a slightly complicated form, to say the least. So the fusion of Orthodox Christian identity and the concept of Georgianness is strong enough to, for example, occasionally legitimize the practice of enforced conversion to Christianity, which has been reported by international organizations, and other discriminatory practices, which was observed by the local NGOs studying the church-state relations. The official publicly available report on activities between 2013 and 18 of the Division of Muslims of All Georgia has no reference to the forced migration. The report mostly focuses on achievements with regards to advancing the popularity of Islam in Georgia, and I'm not going to go into the details. So where does it actually end up? And what's the conclusion? What can be drawn in this perspective? Georgia's religious organizations underwent a significant transition, similarly to the Georgian state, in this institution building and in parallel with the state making itself. So the competition between the 3 most significant religious groups, Orthodox Christians, Muslims, and Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Christians, manifested itself in disagreement over property rights, funding practices, and the overall status of the religious organizations in society. So this was met by fierce criticism from the Georgian Orthodox Church leadership and led to protests against the government. And I'm happy to answer questions about this particular. But despite significant financial advantages of the Georgian Orthodox Church on the religious market, Church maintained, along with clientelistic government practices, starting from presidency of Saakashvili, continuing with the current government, the status of other religious organizations was something that Tugok claimed to find threatening and challenging to its status and its dominant position on the religious market. So in parallel with the religious with the liberal inertia that allowed the religious minorities to register, for example, that this was a big problem, that church ended up the Georgian Orthodox Church ended up organizing a protest against the religious minorities for having the right to be registered as legal entities of public law. So somehow, in parallel with this, the Georgian state wittingly or unwittingly engaged in ethno-religious particularism, which manifested itself both on the symbolic level, for example, on the selection of flag. And if we see Georgian flag, that is clearly Christian symbol, ignoring perhaps the possible preference of Muslim Georgians with regards to the use of Christian symbols on national flag, and the whole problematization of this idea of Islamic, not having Islamic theme in the design of the new flag, for example, in the Muslim Georgian inhabited region of Adjara, for example. So to my last point is that, and again, I'm somehow building also on Jasmine's conversation about the individual level of humanitarian action, with a secular identity of the Georgian state still in the making. And this is, again, very, very much in the process in the making. The internally displaced people from these two conflicting breakaway regions are a little different from other minorities when it comes to integration and accommodation. The ethno-religious markers of distinction are still robust pillars of identities, claims making, and whether one is an IDP, a Georgian Muslim, or ethnic Armenian, the binary categories of Georgian, therefore Orthodox, still finds expression in symbols, funding practices, and in the execution of the law, which is probably the most problematic when it comes to actually institutional logical things. And whether in which direction this can or will unfold remains to be seen, but minorities, ethno-religious or the internally displaced, continue to challenge the normative status quo in order not to become Georgia's forgotten ones. So that's pretty much what I have to say. I'm looking forward to hear the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tornike. Now we move on from South Caucasus to Southeastern Europe, and we have Bulgaria as a case study. And I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Daniela Kalkandieva, who is affiliated with Sofia University, St. Clements, Ohridsky. So, Daniela.
Thank you, Lucian. Hi, everybody. So my contribution to this project was an analysis of the role which religion has played in the forced displacement in the history of modern Bulgaria, and I could outline three major periods. The first one is the pre-communist period. It started with the liberation of Bulgaria from the Ottoman rule and until ends with the Second World War. The next one is the communist period, and the third one is after the fall of communism. So during the first period, we had intensive waves of incoming and outcoming refugees because of the multiple wars and changes in the state borders in the region of Southeastern Europe. So I'll focus more about this because some of the developments, the past developments, could provide interesting and important insights about the present day development. So in this pre-communist period, we observe a division of labor between the state and the local Orthodox Church in dealing with incoming refugees. As a rule, the state was in charge of the administrative, legal, economic, social issues, while the church focused its efforts on the spiritual needs of Christian refugees, national and foreign. In addition, as a representative of the majority religion in the country, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church played a key role in shaping public attitudes to the newcomers. This is also relevant for the present day situation. At the same time, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church has developed a selective attitude to the acts of violence and forced displacement of religious and often ethno-religious minorities, home and abroad. In such cases, its strategies were determined by the church religious teaching, also church historical experience, and its legal status, as well as the church relations with the state, which varied during the different, the three mentioned periods, before, during, and after communism. As a rule, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church supported the efforts of its young nation state to build an ethnically and religiously homogeneous nation. Actually, similar processes took place in all nation states born out of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Generally, the church leadership was benevolent to the state policy of extraditing Muslims, especially those of Turkish origin. Actually, when Kemal Atatürk came to power in Turkey, he launched a repatriation policy that pursued the same exchange of population. Bulgarians moved to Bulgaria, and Turks in Bulgaria were moved to Turkey. In the case of Bulgarian Muslims, or the so-called Pomaks, however, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church took the initiative in its hands and converted thousands of them during the Balkan Wars. In its drive for an ethno-religious unity, the Bulgarian Synod, the leadership of the Orthodox Church, supported the exchange of Orthodox Greeks and Romanians who lived in Bulgaria. They remained here after the liberation from the Ottoman rule, for Orthodox Bulgarians from the neighbor territories of Greece and Romania. In fact, until the Cold War, the main refugee streams in Southeastern Europe were oriented to the respective kin state and kin Orthodox Church. In the case of incoming refugees, the Bulgarian Church was guided by their shared path rather by their religious identity. For example, it gave a hand of help to Armenians who fled from the Ottoman Empire, as well as to the emigres from Bolshevik Russia. The main exception in this case was the case of the non-Orthodox Bulgarian refugees, like Catholics and Protestants, who became subjects of multiple attempts for conversion to Orthodoxy when they settled in Bulgaria. From this perspective, the recent refugee waves present a new challenge for Bulgaria, because they have brought people who, in addition to their different religious identity, lack a shared experience with Bulgarians. From this historical perspective, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church provided several types of support to forcibly displaced communities. In the case of incoming Orthodox Bulgarian refugees, which were counted about 700,000 from 1878 to 1945. So these Orthodox Bulgarian refugees received pastoral and spiritual care. This, however, this strategy wasn't applied to the Orthodox Russians, because the Bulgarian Church had a schismatic status. So it wasn't able to communicate with these refugees in a canonical way and to perform sacraments with them. So they were allowed to organize their religious life independently, but the Bulgarian Orthodox Church provided them with significant material support, giving them money, providing them accommodation, giving temples, offering social services. There was also Armenian asylum seekers who weren't Orthodox but Christian, so they received serious moral support but lesser material support in the case of Bulgaria. On the one hand, they rely on the finances of the Armenian diaspora, while on the other hand, and this is important, their socialization in Bulgaria was facilitated by the mode of their immigration. They immigrated with the entire neighborhoods, with their families and priests. So these preserved religious networks allowed them to rebuild their parish-based social infrastructures in the host country. So this specific feature, I think, is also important when we analyze the present-day waves of refugees. to what degree these parish or mosque-based infrastructures were preserved in the process of their migration. And finally, the Bulgarian Holy Synod opposed the deportation of the local Jewish minority during the Second World War. Despite the anti-Semitic laws, it allowed their mixed marriages with Orthodox Bulgarians, provided Jews with certificates of baptism, and sent letters of protest to the pro-Nazi Bulgarian government. Such acts, however, provoked tense discussions among the Orthodox clergy, whether it was theologically correct to baptize people whose wish for conversion wasn't inspired by true religious conviction. In final terms, at that time, during the Second World War, the Bulgarian churchmen united around a more open ecumenical understanding of church, Christian ethos and humanity, and therefore they defended the Bulgarian Jews. In this regard, however, I should mention that after the fall of communism, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church has left the international ecumenical organizations, and this isolationism limited the channels of religious diplomacy which the Bulgarian Orthodox Church can use. And moreover, it led to the negative approach demonstrated by the Bulgarian Synod during the recent refugee crisis. In contrast to the Orthodox churches in Greece and Serbia, the Bulgarian one turned a blind eye to the humanitarian aspects of this migration and approached it as a security issue. In its encyclicals, the Bulgarian Synod depicts the refugees as island people, while failing to appeal to the Christian hospitality of Orthodox Bulgarians as it happened during the Holocaust. Meanwhile, the ethos of humanity was advanced by non-Orthodox religious agencies as the Catholic Caritas, different NGOs like the Council of Refugee Women in Bulgaria, and the national branches of such international organizations as the United Nations Refugee Agency. So I'll stop here, and if there are some questions, I'll speak later. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. A reminder to everyone that you can ask questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So moving on from Southeastern Europe to Ukraine, sort of closing the loop. Delighted to have Dr. Dmytro Vovk, who teaches and also runs the Center for the Rule of Law and Religious Studies at Yaroslav Mudry National Law University in Kharkiv, in Ukraine. So, Dmytro.
Thank you, Lucian. I should say that the topic is fascinating because there are so many aspects, so many dimensions, so many links between religion and forced displacement. And as I know, this project has successfully addressed many of them. As for Ukraine, I'm just going to share with you some points about our case, which I think might be theoretically interesting and practically important. In contrast to several other post-Soviet republics, till 2014, Ukraine had not been involved in wars and had not experienced violent, large-scale civil conflicts. Also, the country did not attract significant numbers of labor migrants or refugees, particularly because the state was and is reluctant to grant the status of refugee, and most applicants were usually deported from Ukraine. Thus, forced displacement was not a major focus of public discourse or state policies in Ukraine until things changed in 2014. The Russian-Ukrainian conflict, including the military conflict in Eastern Ukraine, Donbas region, and the annexation of Crimea, forced a huge wave of internally displaced people, IDPs, to flee from Donbas to other regions of Ukraine, and the same wave of those who escaped to other countries like Russia, like European Union countries, the United States, Canada, Armenia, as Jasmine said, and many others. The problem is that we don't really know real numbers. We have official figures from the Ukrainian government that in the government's register of IDPs, there are about 1.5 million people, but not all of them are real IDPs. They're going from uncontrolled territories back and forth, and but did not move to the territory under the Ukrainian control, under the government control. When the conflict began, one thing that we discovered is that the state is not capable to provide any substantial support for IDPs, and religious groups, religious charities, as well as secular organizations took lion's share of responsibility for providing support for the most vulnerable IDPs, including children, single mothers, homeless people, and so on. And here are 3 points I'd like to discuss. First, in Ukraine, we have a big debate about religious landscape of the country. The problem here is that religious self-identification does not correlate with institutional structure, as in many, in fact, Orthodox countries, with institutional structure of religious landscape. Public opinion polls prove that absolute majority of Ukrainians expectedly affiliate themselves with one of the Orthodox churches, and it's about 65% of Ukrainians, while, for example, only 2% belongs to Protestant communities. However, structural analysis shows that Protestant made up a quarter of the total number of religious organizations in the country. And if we add to this number Jehovah's Witnesses, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and new religions, you will have one third of religious landscape. And if you try to evaluate the contribution of each religion to resolving the IDP problem, I don't mean real figures, but visibility of this contribution in public discourses and in media and so on, we will see that the role of religions is closer to institutional structure. In my report, I provided detailed analysis showing that, yes, Orthodox churches plays an important role in addressing the forced displacement problem, particularly on political level, bringing the topic to the public discourse and before the state. But in many ways, the role of religious minorities in addressing needs of IDPs is really crucial. Of course, one can find many explanations of this phenomenon. For example, many religious minorities enjoy support from their Western mother churches, and they use their ties with the West to engage some support. Consider Baptist and Adventist communities, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormon Church, Roman Catholic Church, Greek Catholic Church, working through Caritas Spes and Caritas Ukraine, respectively. But this is also a good argument in favor of religious freedom and liberal regulation of religion. Among the post-Soviet countries, Ukraine enjoys one of the most liberal religious legislation, which help. I mean, we have some changes since 2014, but it's still one of the most liberal countries in the post-Soviet area with respect to religion. And this liberal character of liberal nature of regulation help a lot to religious minorities to develop and sustain their structures and networks. And the contribution of religious minorities, one of the empirical evidences that liberal regulation and religious neutrality stimulate social activities of religions and contribute to the public good, while restrictive regulation, as we see, for example, in Russia, has chilling effect on religious social services. The second point is that religious contribution is not only about soup kitchens, shelters, collective closets, and other stuff for those in need. Some religious initiatives and projects aim to integrate IDPs to their new communities. This includes, for example, a job search website, centers for psychological and legal aid in several Ukrainian cities, classes on personal finances, short-term business classes, grants for starting a business in their new communities, programs to support mutual understanding between IDPs and locals, family and youth centers, and so on. These long-term solutions should be further developed, of course. Finally, the third point is that religious contribution to resolving IDPs issues is not fully sectarian, which might be an answer to one of questions. Yes, most of projects are operated by a certain religious group by itself. For example, Vice President of the Caritas Ukraine, a Greek Catholic charity, confirmed that, in my interview, confirmed that they did not collaborate with any other religions beyond some joint statements. However, there are some aspects of the IDP problem where religions try to collaborate, it's mostly political statements or calls to the state, but it's also an attempt of the All Ukrainian Council of Churches, is the biggest Ukrainian interfaith initiative, a sort of platform for interfaith dialogue covering 95% of Ukrainian believers. So this council attempts to develop a program of peace building, including dealing with negative stereotypes about political disloyalty of IDPs, their hostility to everything Ukrainian, and so on. This is potentially a very fruitful process. And one of my recommendations is to develop interfaith dialogue in collaboration, although this is a very difficult process, particularly in the case of Ukraine, where inter-Orthodox relations are quite difficult. Expanding religious collaboration for supporting IDPs can potentially result in accumulating more resources than religious groups could accumulate on their own. The same logic applies to cooperation between religions and secular human rights organizations, which sometimes must overcome traditional suspicions that they both feel towards each other. In the situation when the government is lack of trust and public power institutions are weak and fragile, such collaboration is extremely important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dmytro. Thank you to all speakers today. So we have just a little bit over half an hour left, and I said before, I encourage everyone who feels that they have a question to ask the speakers. So in addition to the case studies you heard, we also have with us Dr. Andrei Abram, who wrote the chapter on Moldova. So he will also be very happy to answer any questions on Moldova. I see we have here 4 questions, and 2 questions relate to Georgia. So I would let Tornika to answer that. It's a rather long text, so Tornika, I will leave it for you to read it if you have not done so already. So I would the first and the second question. So I should start with the second question. I'm not sure everybody who watches our webinar has access to the question, so I'll just read it. So, do the findings of the report, though examining a specific geographical area, indicate why the global trends of how states deal with displaced people and the rise in sectarianism? In other words, are the recommendations and findings applicable and relevant to other regions facing similar problems? So I should start by saying that our aim was not to answer all the issues related to forced displacements around the world. So we don't have that particular claim. We particularly look at Southeastern Europe and the former Soviet states and countries that I mentioned. And I started by saying that it's important to look on a case by case to see similarities or differences between countries in the region. However, I would say that perhaps there are two issues that you can be applied not just to this region but other parts of the world. Think about Mexico, African countries as well. So the first one is the fact is the politicization of the discourse coming from religious communities in relation to humanitarian aid and also populations in need. So perhaps this is an issue that it emerges across not just Southeastern Europe, but also from other parts of the world. And the other item, which I emphasized before, the fact that although you have this all interreligious dialogue, interfaith programs on humanitarian aid, at local level, there is very little dialogue, there is very little engagement between religious communities and people in need, in the sense that if you cross the borders from one country to another, then you face a completely different reality. And there is no contact between all these countries in their relations to forced displaced populations. Another, so I said the first question, so I hope that addresses this. The first question comes from, I should read, I see here, so we don't have access to the questions, so okay. Another questions to address, and perhaps for the other speakers to think about their case studies. I think this is a very good question. So the Ecumenical Patriarchate recently published a text on Orthodox social ethics, dealing among others with the question of migration and refugees. Have you recognized some reflection upon the position of the Ecumenical Patriarchate from your responding local churches? Is there a theological reassessment of their own practices? Do the churches perceive this document as relevant for themselves? Thank you. So thank you, Regina, for answering a very good question. So I would like to hear from the other speakers as well. My understanding is that there is very little. I mean, I'm familiar with Ecumenical Patriarchate work on and the statements on migrations and refugees, but they stand out. There is very little work, theological engagement, and concrete work with humanitarian programs in the region. And the fact that we have the case study of Bulgaria, I mean, this was, I said, read it carefully, and the statements coming from the Holy Synod condemning the arrival of migrants and refugees in the country, comparing to an invasion, I think that says something that is completely not on the same lines that you will have with other churches in the region and with the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So I shall now, I don't want to be the only one speaking non-stop, so I would like to give the floor now to Tornike. I say he has 2 questions on Georgia, and I'm reading through the questions and I'll come back to you again. So Tornike.
Thank you very much. Thanks for asking excellent questions. I have 2 questions. One comes from username Guramius. So the question, I'll just read the question because I'm not sure if everybody has access to the question. So the question is, you have referred to the state funding of the Church of Georgia and disproportionate amount of it compared to other religious entities. However, you haven't referred to the constitutional right of it and the concordat, according to which Orthodox Church of Georgia receives this amount as a compensation of the state persecution for 70 years from the Soviet state. This disproportionality could be attributed to its relatively big membership in the country, bigger losses it has experienced during Russian and communist occupation, as well as its historical role for shaping the Georgian culture, see Concordat, except that since Georgia is a secular country, has no obligation to fund other religious organizations except exceptional cases. As for the flag and the Christian symbols, in Georgia we have multiple religious minorities, Jews, Muslims, Yazidis, and so on. According to your approach, our flag should be full of different religious symbols in order not to be hurt any religious minority, and not the actual historical value of the particular flag as well as its symbol in the history of the country. So I think they're very important questions. With the first question, I definitely, in the paper as well as the policy paper, I reflect on the Concordat in a very detailed and nuanced account, which is basically, so for those who may not follow that, the Concordat is a church agreement with the Georgian state, not the Georgian government, that guarantees its rights and numerous domains such as military chaplaincy as well as particular funding practices, let's put it this way. But the slight problem, and I have slight reservations with the whole dynamics, how it unfolds, because, and partly also because of the historical role of other religions in the making of Georgia as we know it, and also the historically repressive measures of the Soviet Union towards other religions that has always been there and defined what Georgian culture was and is. And with regards to the symbol, I think it, at least I'm not the most creative guy in the room to define how the flag could have been looked like, but I think there at least should have been a big public discussion about the symbols, at least on the regional level, on the level of Adjara, which is having significant minority population and whatsoever no reference to the Islamic symbol. So I think if I were to be involved in the discussion, I would definitely recommend to have a public debate about what the flag of Autonomous Republic of Adjara shall be, what the flag of Georgian nation shall look like. And I think there was no public debate, and I'm actually sure there was no public debate. It was done under very big public support by the government that has very high ranking at the time. So it was pretty much a blitzkrieg, and I don't think that such things shall be decided in such accord.
Okay, thank you, Tornike. I would like now to move on to another question from the participants, and to give Andre as well the opportunity to say a few words. So John asked, one of the participants asked, what are the main refugee and or IDP issues in Moldova? So Andre, I don't ask you to give a lecture of 10 minutes to describe the full, there's not a full presentation, but just in a few words, just to summarize the main issue in your view.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. I would refer for a more complex answer to the corresponding chapter in the publication. But to cut a long story short, Moldova is one of the post-Soviet states which lost a significant part of its population through emigration after achieving independence. This was mostly due to the economic downturn in the aftermath of the Soviet Union. So to give you a number, the Moldovan population currently stands at about 2.6 million citizens. That is almost 1 million less than in 1989, so shortly before the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Much of this economic immigration started in the 2000s. There was a first wave in the 1990s, but so 300,000 people had already left Moldova in the 1990s, but most of this phenomenon took place after 2000. You should know that by 1999, 80% of the Moldovan population was considered by the World Bank to be living below the poverty line. As for IDP issues, that is also a very complex question. Moldovan independence was scarred by a civil war in 1992 with the eastern, mostly Russian-speaking region of Transnistria de facto separating from the remaining territory of the Republic of Moldova under central government control. And there were about 100,000 people who left Transnistria for third countries, and about 51,000 who left Transnistria for other parts of Moldova. So a total of about 150,000. These comprised about 1/3 of Transnistria's population. Now, most of these people actually returned. So, for example, 60,000 people sought refuge in the Ukraine, and they subsequently returned. And in Moldova proper, there were, I think, in 2012, only 200 IDP families left. So subsequently, Transnistria also suffered from the same economically motivated emigration. Transnistrian population in 1989 was about 475,000, and now it's about 200,000 less. So proportionally, they lost more people, but it was not due to the civil war. It was due to the same economic reasons that encouraged Moldovan citizens to emigrate as well. I hope that the question is thus answered.
Okay, thank you very much, Andre. We move on to, we have two questions in relation to the situation in Ukraine from Andrew and Vasilev. So I'll read them and then I'll ask Dmytro. So has the Orthodox Church of Ukraine developed its own principles of social teaching, including policy towards refugees or IDPs? That's the first question. And the second question, which I suspect is related to that, might you elaborate on the effectiveness of Ukrainian Council of Churches and religious organizations? Dmitry.
Thank you for the questions. With respect to social doctrine of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, as you probably know, this is a very young church. It was established less than 2 years ago. And there are no documents, no official documents addressing these issues in general, a sort of proposing doctrine on social issues and including IDPs. At the same time, Orthodox Church of Ukraine benefits from the documents of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kiev Patriarchate. And that church had several documents addressing social issues, but their social doctrine was developed at the beginning of it was the beginning of the third millennium. Sorry for this. And there were no problem of IDP. So there are no really big discussion of migrants or IDPs and so on. But I should say that in contrast to some national Orthodox churches, there are no negative stance on migrants, refugees, because this is not the case in Ukraine, but also IDPs issues. Moreover, there are several statements in favor of IDPs addressed to local elites, to politicians, to the state, that you should support those people, you should help them to be integrated into their new communities, and so on and so forth. With respect to the second question, I mean, if you mean general effectiveness of the All Ukrainian Council of Churches, yes, it's pretty much effective because, for example, they are pretty successful in their opposition to gender legislation, for example, ratification of the Council of Europe, Istanbul Convention. They're pretty successful in maintaining the relations with the state. In fact, they almost monopolize the relations with the state, because when the president of Ukraine or the prime minister or the head of the speaker of the parliament meet with church leaders, it means that they meet with the All Ukrainian Council of Churches usually, or leaders of the biggest religious groups. But at the same time, they face several challenges. First of all, there are several religions which are not satisfied with the membership of this council, because they are not members of this council. It's a sort of closed club for the biggest religious communities. So some of them are out. For example, some Muslim communities are out, and for them it's a problem, and they try to establish a sort of competing organization. And also, I have an impression that this effectiveness and this real success of the All Ukrainian Council of Churches is grounded or is rooted in the split within the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Because if you have something like the Russian Orthodox Church or Georgian Orthodox Church, I mean, huge church of majority with close ties with the state, we would never have such a interface organization as All Ukrainian Council of Churches, just because the biggest church would not need it. They would have their own relations with the state. If we are talking about effectiveness with respect to IDP problem, there is a commission for social service within the All Ukrainian Council of Churches, and they try to address the IDP problem. For example, they made a document about peace building in Ukraine, including IDP problem, which I mentioned in my presentation. For example, they address the problem of negative stereotypes against IDPs and so on. And they started to work on provisions of this document. For example, they made several videos addressing the problem of peace building of Ukraine. But it's still initiatives which are not main initiatives in this field. As I said, the work of religious communities are mostly sectarian. Yes, they mostly work on their own, and this creates the room for increasing their effectiveness in this sphere.
Okay, thank you, Dimitri. I would like to.
I think I missed the question. I apologize, Lucian. So in case you have time, I have to address another question, which was.
I would like to give the floor to the others speakers. Give the opportunity to everyone to answer. So yes. So I would like to move on, I said, from Ukraine to Armenia. We have a question here, which relates to Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, but I suspect it's very much about all the other countries as well. So the question is, again from John, how is it for refugees and IDPs in these countries to travel, to work, and settle in the EU? So that's I would like to hear Jasmine what she thinks about the Armenian case. But in addition to that, if I may, I would like to I have a question on my own. So I suspect everybody's been watching the news, the recent tension between Armenia and Azerbaijan just a few days ago. So I was wondering if the topic of displacement, topic of refugees, came across in mass media. If you follow the news in Armenia, and what are your thoughts? What's happening there at the moment? So, two questions for you, Justin.
Okay, so the first question I try to answer to John. John, well, the problem is if talking about people coming to the European Union, that's quite difficult to answer, because each state of the European Union, each member of the European Union has its own legal framework for refugees and migrant workers. So, for example, if I can tell you about Austria, which is rather strict about incoming people from those countries, there is a difference between real refugees, which means refugees of war, of armed conflicts, and immigrant workers or migrant workers. So for migrant workers, it depends upon the profession, and it depends upon if they are needed as workers in Austria. If they are real refugees, they can ask for asylum. That's another point. So that's just for Austria, and other countries might have other regulations and laws regarding how to get work, how to get permission to stay. So this is a very complicated procedure in most of the European countries, especially after the big refugee waves we had in 15. And as far as I know, because I have been working for the asylum office, and I've been working with refugees here in Austria, but mainly from countries like Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the other countries are not considered as countries where we have actual armed conflicts. Like Ukraine is maybe at the moment quite calm, for, as we say in European countries, but let's say for the other countries like Georgia, Moldova, and so on, they are just considered as migrant workers or as economic, so to say, refugees. So it might be quite difficult for them to get permission to stay and work. I hope it helps you.
Thank you. And the other question, the question I had on
I'm sure you've heard about the tensions, and especially Lucian, we have been in this region. We have been very close to this region in the northern part of Armenia, which is a very depopulated region, and where the state and the church try to keep the people there, to keep the villages there, to help the people with some programs. Unfortunately, with this tension and with the escalation, again, the question started, what's going on there? Will the people stay? Will the people remain? mostly elderly people are living in this region. As far as I know, there was not such a lot of exchange between population in this region. Compared to the escalation we had in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, there were about 2,000 people coming in from this escalation. Now I have not seen any numbers so far.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Another question came for you while you were speaking. So can you say, the question is, I'll read it, it's from Craig. Craig, could you say a few, so you spoke about the prioritization of help or efforts from the Armenian Apostolic Church, ethnic Armenian first, citizens next, others after that. Could you say something about the situation for Yazidis and Kurds in Armenia and the extent to which there has also been some recent influx from MENA region?
Well,
what do you see the Yazidis and the Kurds?
Yeah, so first of all, regarding these two tribes, let's say it like this. So yes, Armenia is perhaps the only country in the world where there's a real division between Yazidis and Kurds. So in ethnic and in religious and in linguistic terms. So the Yazidis are at the moment the biggest numerical minority in Armenia, about 40,000, let's say, which is quite a small percentage of the whole population of Armenia, 1%, 1.5. Kurds are more or less not living anymore in Armenia. With the Karabakh conflict and the armed the war in the 90s against Azerbaijan, there was a kind of depopulation. Christians came from Azerbaijan and Muslims went to Azerbaijan or to Iran. So there are hardly Kurds, real Muslim Kurds left in Armenia, just a few families. Yes, the situation is quite okay. So they are accepted by the Armenian state. They are national minorities, so they have the rights of a recognized national minority to use their religion free of and what is very interesting, with the persecution of Yazidis in Iraq, a few of the Yazidis came to Armenia and got the right to stay. And perhaps you've heard that it was just last year that the biggest Yazidi temple in the world was built and opened in Armenia. So Armenia is slowly becoming the new center of Yazidism in the world. Because the Armenian population is very tolerant towards Yazidis because they share a common history, especially the history in the Ottoman Empire. They have been neighbors for many years, for many centuries, and they share a lot of common cultural traditions. So that's why they have a very good status in the Republic of Armenia.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. I would like now to, we have only 5 minutes left, so I would like to ask a question to Daniela, if I may, and then I'll go back to Tornigis. I know that you wanted to add a short answer. So I mentioned briefly the unusual statement coming from the Holy Synod of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church in relation to migrants and refugees, condemning those arriving in the country. And that statement was a few years ago. I was wondering, have you noticed a change in the religious circles or in the public? How does the public still, or how does the public perceive this statement now, or has been no change? Or what are your thoughts on events happening since in the last 2-3 years now?
Thank you, Lucian. Actually, I wanted just to raise again this Regina's question, because when we speak about Orthodox churches, usually we discuss the behavior and the decisions of the hierarchy, sometimes of priests, but we pay less attention to laymen. And in the case of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, although the Holy Synod neglected the call of the ecumenical patriarch regarding the refugees, laymen, there were laymen who disagreed with this position. They publish their opinions in social media, in newspapers. And the other thing is that there were also laymen who individually decided to join agencies that help refugees. And so when we speak about the Bulgarian church as a community, the situation is not so hopeless. But now, because there are no refugees, this issue, nobody discusses this issue. And I'm not sure that in a case of the next wave of refugees, the things will be quite different, unfortunately, because of at least two reasons. One of the reasons is the bad economic situation, especially now with the coronavirus, but the other thing is the very gloomy demographic perspective of Bulgaria, because about 2 million people actually left the country, and there are no young people, so this makes people a little bit afraid of foreigners, especially when, as Yasmina said, there is no shared common history. So this is also very important, especially in the case of Orthodox churches that are quite linked with the national histories.
Okay, yes, thank you, Danielle. I think, yes, making this distinction between the top hierarchy and the faithful, the lay people, as you put it, I think it's important. And Tornike, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, sure. Thank you to Allah Hadid. I missed this question in the opener. So there is three things. The question was about what's the current situation in the Muslims in Abkhazia, especially after the reception of many diaspora from Syria, and how do you think this affects the conflict between Abkhazia and Georgia? Well, there are three things. Again, in the short summary, which I can say, there is a problem of language. Not many repatriates speak Abkhazian language. They don't have the also the accessibility to the Russian language, which is actually the lingua franca. And also there is a problem of public perception of the extent of religiosity. And there are a lot of stereotypes about that. And then some journalists have done research on it. And also there is some sort of disproportional charity on behalf of the Abkhazian authorities towards the repatriates. Again, on the public discourse level, there was a report that they're getting approximately 130 euros, which is a lot considered to the Abkhazians. So there were a lot of pressure mechanisms, let's put it this way, that actually made these people move back to Syria or to the European countries. So approximately from 500 families, I think around 200 moved and 300 stayed there. But this information needs to be verified, because I'm not necessarily an expert on that. So I kind of give you the quick sketch from the media.
Perfect. Thank you. Right on time. Perfect. It's 5:30 here in UK. So, and of course, different parts of the world where you are. So thank you very much to the speakers for joining us. Thank you very much to the participants for asking the questions. And I hope you find this, our thoughts useful. Also, thank you to the Foreign Policy Center for hosting the webinar and giving us the opportunity to engage with you. While I was reading the Q&A, I received another message from a different source saying that where is the report? So just have a look on the Foreign Policy website. It's in the publication section, and I hope you will find it useful and in your work as well. So if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to contact us. So with that in mind, thanks again to everyone, and I wish everyone a good summer. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.